The highest military honor in the Roman state was a triumph. Octavian now returned to Rome from Egypt to enjoy a triple triumph. Not one, but 3 days in the middle of August 29 BC were set aside for the celebration of his victories. The first day was for the victory at Philippi, when the death of Julius Caesar had been avenged. The second day was in honor of his two naval victories, the one at Actium and one against the pirates of Sicily. The third, greatest and most magnificent of all, was the celebration of his victory over Egypt. Each day the streets were lined with crowds echoing the cry of Io, triumph, Io, the triumph. But on the third day, hours before the first strains of music could be heard, there was no standing room left along the streets or on the housetops. As the procession started to move along the sacred way in the direction of the Forum, the excitement was intense. First to appear, following the musicians, were two sleek milk-white oxen to be used in the sacrifice, their horns gilded and hung with garlands of flowers. Next, trundling by on heavy wheels, came the carriages heaped high with trophies and spoils of war. Before the crowds ceased marveling at their riches, the captives were led by in chains, most of whom, on this day of mingled tragedy and joy, would soon be strangled to death on the steps of the dungeon. And now a triumphal car rolled by, high on top of which, dazzling in its lifelike beauty, was to be seen an image of Cleopatra, lying on her golden couch, as she had in death. Next, walking 2 by 2 in clean-cut precision, came a company of 12 lictors carrying fasces, decorated with laurels, followed by more musicians and dancers. And then, then in all his glitter and glory came the hero of the day, the victorious imperator, the general of the armies. Standing in a golden chariot drawn by 4 white horses rode Octavian, looking most majestic and unnatural. Dressed in a purple cloak embroidered in gold, he was wearing a gold crown of laurel leaves, and his face was painted vermilion like that of the statue of Jupiter on a festival day. In his right hand he held an ivory scepter topped by the Roman eagle. Riding with him were 2 boys, their faces radiant as his own had once been on a similar occasion. The small dark one was pointed out as being his sister's son, Marcellus. The taller one, with sandy hair, was his stepson, Tiberius. Following on foot, with their white togas and broad crimson stripes, came the 2 consuls and several hundred senators, their faces florid in the heat, but their manner full of dignity, despite their unsuccessful effort to keep in step with the music. At sight of them, a faint murmur of shocked surprise ran through the crowd. It was the first time in the history of Rome that the senators had followed, instead of preceded, the general. It could only mean that the first place of authority in the Roman state had been taken from the Senate and given to a single man. Rome was no longer a republic. The victorious army brought up the end of the parade, cavalry clattering by on their high-stepping horses, foot soldiers in shining armor crowned with laurel, decorated for valor, singing songs, cheering and shouting the contagious cry of Io triumph. Winding through the Forum up to the Capitoline, the procession halted there before the statue of Jupiter, greatest and best. There the white oxen were slaughtered, and their blood spilt in sacrifice on the burning altar. Octavian then stepped forward. Removing his crown of laurel, he laid it upon the knee of Jupiter as a mark of gratitude to heaven for his victories. Descending the marble steps again, all returned to the Forum, where with great pomp a new temple was dedicated by Octavian. A new building opened, lavish gifts presented to the leaders of the city. Additional rewards and special medals were accorded veterans and heroes, all with appropriate and impressive oratory. But a little apart, on the fringe of the forum, there was seen something that indicated the true importance of that day. A great gate, no longer standing open. Solemnly, and for but the third time in the history of Rome, the temple of Janus had been closed. Peace had come at last to the Roman world. Civil war, Octavian promised them, and wars of conquest were over. From now on, the only battles fought would be to protect the empire from the uncivilized barbarians, not to extend its borders. And so it was to be. For 200 years, longer than any time before or since, the world around the Mediterranean was at peace. That famous and unequaled era of peace, known as the Great Pax Romana, had now dawned.